The hotel president in Kansas City had seen many guests come and go during the winter of 1935. It was a place where businessmen sought quiet rooms, travelers rested from the bitter Midwest cold, and secrets, both harmless and dark, passed through its lobby unnoticed. But on the afternoon of January 2nd, a man entered whose presence seemed off. He was young, pale, with dark hair combed neatly to the side. He signed the register as Roland T. Owen from Los Angeles. His voice was flat, almost mechanical, as if he were reciting a name that wasn't his own. He carried little more than a comb, a brush, and a bottle of hair tonic. No luggage, no suitcase. He asked for an interior room high up away from windows. The desk clerk handed him the key to room 1046. The bellboy escorted him up, noting how oddly the man behaved. He didn't laugh at small talk, didn't smile, and seemed lost in thought. When they reached the room, Owen pulled the blinds shut immediately, drowning the space in a dim, suffocating gloom. The bellboy left quickly, glad to escape the strange silence. Behind that door, room 1046 was no ordinary hotel room. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. The single overhead lamp seemed weak, as though the darkness fought back. It was the kind of room that felt watched. And from the moment Roland T. Owen locked the door, something inside that room stirred awake. The first night in room 1046 passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. But by the next morning, staff began to notice strange behavior. A maid came to clean the room. Inside, the blinds were drawn tight, the room lit only by a small lamp. Roland sat silently in a chair, as if waiting for someone. His expression was hollow, his eyes fixed on nothing. "Could you leave the door unlocked?" he asked her quietly, his tone stiff, rehearsed. "Someone will be coming soon." The maid found the request unusual, but she complied. When she returned later, she noticed the door was locked from the outside. Inside, Roland was sitting in the dark again, whispering on the phone. "Yes," he muttered. "No, not yet. Don't. I'll be here for a while." She caught fragments, but the conversation wasn't meant for her. Later, another employee passed the hallway and noticed the door ajar. He heard two voices inside. One was Roland's. The other was lower, harder to place. When the staff member knocked politely, the voices fell silent. The door shut. By evening, the hotel switchboard operator grew irritated. The phone in room 1046 had been left off the hook for hours. Calls went unanswered. Annoyed, the staff sent the bellboy to remind Roland to hang up. When he opened the door, Roland stood inside, completely alone, the shadows clinging to him like wet cloth. His eyes darted to the hallway behind the bellboy as if expecting someone else. He said nothing. The bellboy placed the phone back on the receiver and left quickly, unsettled. But later that night, the phone was off the hook again, and this time, when the staff returned, the room was locked from the inside. The third night in room 1046 was when the hotel's unease turned into dread. Guests down the hall later swore they heard voices, heated, tense, like two men arguing. One said the tone was sharp, as though Roland was begging or warning someone. Another thought they heard a woman's voice, faint but agitated. Shortly after midnight, the phone operator grew irritated yet again. The line from 1046 was still off the hook. She sighed, assuming the guest had simply fallen asleep, and sent a bellboy to knock. When he reached the door, he rapped lightly. No answer. He tried again. This time a voice came from inside, low, weak. "Come in." The bellboy tried the handle, but the door was locked. "I can't," he replied. After a long pause, the same fragile voice whispered, "Turn on the lights." Chilled, the bellboy knocked once more. No movement. Eventually he left, deciding the strange guest was probably drunk, but around 7 a.m. another operator noticed the phone line was still dangling. Another employee was dispatched. He knocked again. This time, there was no answer at all. Against protocol, he used his passkey. The room inside was dim, the curtains still drawn. At first it looked empty, but then he saw him. Roland was on his knees, naked, his body collapsed forward onto the carpet. His skin was pale as candle wax. Dark stains pooled beneath him, trailing across the floor, the sheets, the walls. His wrists and ankles bore marks, as if bound. He lifted his head slowly, revealing deep bruises and cuts across his skull. His eyes glistened in the dim light, unfocused but alive. "They held me down," he rasped. His voice cracked like broken glass. "It was someone else, in here." Terrified, the staff called for help. When the operator rushed in, Roland collapsed onto the bed, clutching his head. The room smelled faintly of metal, sweat, and something chemical. The phone was dangling again, cord swaying slightly as if someone had just let go, and yet no one else was in the room. Only Roland, broken, and room 1046, silent as a tomb. The ambulance rushed Roland T. Owen, if that was even his real name, to the hospital. The doctors were astonished he was still alive. His skull had been fractured from repeated blows. His chest bore stab wounds. His arms and legs showed the unmistakable signs of bindings, as though he had been restrained for hours, maybe longer. "Who did this to you?" a detective demanded, leaning close to the bed. Roland's lips moved slowly, each word an effort against the dark tide pulling him under. "No one," he whispered. "I fell." The detective frowned. "You didn't do this to yourself. Who was in that room?" Roland's eyes flickered. A shadow passed over his face, as though some memory haunted him more than the pain. "It was him," Roland murmured. Don did this." Before the detective could press him further, Roland's body stiffened. His breath rattled in his chest, then fell silent. His head lolled to the side. Roland T. Owen was gone. Back at the hotel, investigators combed room 1046. But the room gave no answers, only questions. There were no clothes, no personal belongings, nothing to identify the victim. Even the hotel stationery was missing, as though someone had stripped the room of anything that could speak his name. The only things left behind were a comb, a brush, and a bottle of diluted sulfuric acid. The walls, however, still spoke. Faint smears of blood trailed along the plaster, leading to the locked door, the phone, the bed. It was as if the room itself had bled, whispering the struggle that had unfolded there. And in the silence, the hotel staff swore they could still hear it, the faint click of a phone receiver, lifted and dropped. Click, click, as though someone was still there, trying to call out from the other side. Though Roland, later identified as Artemis Ogletree, was buried, the story of room 1046 didn't end. In some ways it had only begun. Not long after his death, strange letters began arriving at his mother's home in Birmingham, Alabama. They were typed, not handwritten, odd for Artemis, who had never owned a typewriter. The language was formal, stilted, unlike the way he usually wrote. One letter said he had taken a job and was traveling abroad. Another claimed he was safe and would write again soon. Months later, a mysterious man even called his mother, insisting Artemis was fine, that he had married and moved away. The voice was low, curt, and refused to answer questions. But she knew better. A mother always knows. Police suspected the letters were meant to throw off suspicion, to convince the family he was alive long after room 1046 had claimed him. But who wrote them, and why? Even stranger were the rumors among hotel staff. Some swore they saw a shadowy figure slipping into the elevators late that night, never returning. Others claimed a woman with dark hair and heavy makeup had been seen pacing the 10th floor, looking over her shoulder as if she were being followed. And then there was the name Roland had muttered before his death, Don, but no Don was ever found, no clear suspect ever named. The hotel president moved on. Guests continued to check in and out, never knowing that one of its rooms had soaked up a story of fear, blood, and silence. But the locals never forgot. To this day, some say room 1046 holds more than history. Guests who've stayed there whisper of phones ringing in the dead of night, the receiver dangling with no one on the other end. Some claim to hear a man's voice, weak, broken, pleading from the shadows. Turn on the lights, and when the lights are switched on, the room is empty. Only the drawn blinds remain. The hotel president eventually closed its doors, later reopening under a new name. Time passed. The lobby was remodeled. The walls were painted over. But room 1046 remained a shadow in the building's history, a locked box of unanswered questions. People still argue about what really happened that January night in 1935. Was Roland, Artemis, lured there by a lover? Was it a secret deal gone wrong? Was Don a criminal, a jealous partner, or a figment of a dying man's confusion? We may never know, but those who've walked past the room whisper that the air feels colder there, heavier, as though the walls themselves remember. Some guests claim that when the halls are quiet, they can still hear the faint sound of a phone off the hook, a desperate call for help that never reached anyone. The true horror of room 1046 is not just the blood on the walls, nor the mystery of a man who died alone in the dark. It's the silence that followed, the people who turned away, who assumed the cries were drunken ramblings, who ignored the ringing phone because it was inconvenient. No one came when he needed them most. And in that silence, a man's life ended. That's the lesson buried inside the horror, the importance of listening when something feels wrong, the courage to check when others turn away, the reminder that sometimes the scariest thing is not a ghost or a shadow, but our own indifference. Because every horror story has a monster, and sometimes that monster is the sound of a phone ringing in the dark, waiting for someone, anyone, to answer.